everybody. Welcome to the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation Disease Education webinar series. I'm Jamie Lederer. I am the Outreach Director with our Clinical Affairs team, and I'm really excited that you've all joined us for today's webinar. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping remarks. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the PFF's YouTube channel for additional viewing at your convenience, and all registrants will receive an email when the video recording is available. The slide deck for today's presentation can be found in the chat section down below. If you need closed captioning, the option for that can often be found under the More button. In the Q&A section of the panel, you can send in any questions that you may have during the presentation. At the end of the presentations, we'll have a question and answer session when both speakers will be available to answer as many questions as possible. So please put those questions in that Q&A section and we will try to get to as many as we can. There will be a survey at the completion of today's webinar, and we would really appreciate your feedback on the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation Disease Education webinar series. Your feedback's important and helps us to continue to improve this series. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We're joined today by Dr. Kristen Berger. Dr. Kristen Berger is a faculty member in the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College. She completed her fellowship training at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell, where she also earned a master's degree in clinical and translational investigation. Dr. Berger's clinical and research interests are centered on interstitial lung disease. She's currently investigating the role of airway processes in the development and progression of pulmonary fibrosis. We're also joined today by Dr. Amy Case. Dr. Amy Hajari Case established the ILD program at the Georgia Lung Associates, which then became part of the Piedmont Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Division in 2013. She leads the Advanced Lung Disease program at Piedmont and directs the ILD program, which became part of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation's Care Center Network in 2014. Dr. Case also serves as the principal investigator for numerous clinical trials for pulmonary fibrosis, as well as the chief medical officer for the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. Our speakers today will be presenting on building the evidence pyramid, what makes research reliable. One last thing before we get started, we do have to provide the medical disclaimer. Please note that any information contained in this presentation is for informational and/or educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult your personal physician or healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your specific medical condition. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to kick it off first. I really appreciate you going through my bio. I get to talk to this audience a lot, but I keep my introduction brief, so it was very kind. Let's get started. So today we're going to talk about levels of medical and scientific evidence, and we're going to do it in the context of health-related information and how we get that. I remember when I was younger hearing about the World Wide Web and the information superhighway and how that was going to really connect people, connect ideas, and make information more accessible. Unfortunately, I think the information superhighway has gotten incredibly crowded with traffic, and not all of that traffic is always very useful or helpful to people. So health-related information is kind of everywhere, right? I can't turn around, I can't open my phone, I can't open my email, or look at any social media without getting some sort of targeted ad about something. Now I get targeted ads for other things too, but there's health-related information everywhere, and it might be finding you rather than you finding it sometimes. And I'm going to show you some ways in which you might go out and look for something, but in other ways, health-related information might be coming to you when you're not looking for it. So everybody's familiar with newspapers and magazines. That's certainly an area where you can get health-related information. Usually that's coming to you because you've asked for it or have a subscription. We see health-related ads on television very frequently if you are watching a big game or a television series or something like that. You just can't miss ads about healthcare systems and doctors' offices and the latest medical products. Websites like the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation's website, as well as other types of websites that share medical and health information, webinars like this one, or other types of videos that you might find on video platforms. Social media, certainly rife with lots and lots of different types of health-related media, some of them reliable and others not. Computer and phone-based applications, and then AI or artificial intelligence applications are things that are starting to pop up and really providing health-related information in a way that we're just beginning to understand the utilization of, and how to control and how to use in the best way for people. So these are just some examples that you might recognize. The Fonz there on the cover of the AARP magazine, which has lots of information about being a retired person or being around a retired person, which obviously includes health, staying safe driving at night, tech, medical breakthroughs for managing diabetes and so on. You can see on that cover. You can also see the WebMD platform. So that's a website you might use. It's a fairly reliable source for things, but you always have to consider what you're viewing there as well. I went and typed into a search platform, what is pulmonary fibrosis, and my search gave me an AI or artificial intelligence overview. And I wanted to show this example because actually this is fairly accurate, but it references little links and pulls its sources. So that's a really important thing to see when you're getting information. Where is it coming from? And if that's not transparent, you've got to be very careful, because some of the AI tools make things up sometimes, or maybe pull inaccurate information. And if you can't check the source, that you have to be a little worried about that. And then finally, over on the right corner there, that's just a screenshot from my personal Fitbit app. So it has my own health information, which I'm not going to show you the number of steps I haven't taken today. But this was a little coaching section of my app, and obviously it's trying to tell me something about relaxing and sleeping better and stressing less. So just some ways that information is there. Now, this is something I saw on my own personal social media, not because I was looking for it, but because it just showed up in my feed yesterday or 2 days ago. And I kind of hid who it was and where it came from, because I don't want it to feel like I'm endorsing this. But this is ostensibly health-related information from an influencer. She's got a blue check. Somebody knows who she is. And she's saying, like, this is an honest review. I took a shot of some orange juice tasting stuff and it was really good for my liver. I subscribe to it, and so can you. So this is showing some potentially health-related information, but in the way of a testimonial that's also been sponsored and is like an advertisement for this product. Now, Dr. Berger's going to talk in a few minutes about different levels of evidence, but this is one person's experience. And it's in the way that she's sharing it, it has some details to it, very little medical information. But in the medical literature, we use case reports for one person's experience. And this is just a case report that was published in the medical literature. And a case report gives details about a medical situation with one patient, and gives the details of that and explains what went on with them and what the conclusions of that were. And the reason for this is to try to share either a new finding or something that's a little unusual in a presentation, so that other doctors and scientists can learn about what went on and generate hypotheses and learn more. Now, I also use online product reviews. Okay, so these are not health-related information because I didn't really want to share health-related products out there as though I might be advertising for them. So these are actually clothing reviews. On the left is just one case, right? So this is almost like a case report. It's one person's experience with their blue jeans, and they gave them 5 stars. They thought they were great. Well, that's one person's experience. But what might be more useful is to add up multiple people's experience. So in the middle here, there are 59 reviews, and you can see there are a smattering of different star ratings. Not everybody had that 5-star experience that the jean lover here showed. And that might give you a little bit more idea of where you could fall if somebody is maybe more your size or a little more like you. Then that I would liken to something called a case series, okay? And a case series is several cases. This is from the CDC, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And the CDC will publish case reports and case series to try to show a little bit about something, again, new or unusual, but in multiple people, and try to understand patterns and the different, different characteristics of something that might be new or novel that they can share with others. Now, I also mentioned periodicals. There is some great journalism out there and some great health reporters out there. This is just one example. And I put this here because I know and are active in our PFF community, several of these doctors that were interviewed for this particular article that was published a couple of years ago. It's a really interesting piece, and it shows images. It talks about 3 cases, so this is kind of a case series, but they report their sources. They quote directly from the people who they interviewed, and they talk about how they evaluated this information, and they're sharing it in a way that's more digestible for the general public than perhaps in a medical journal. Now, I want to say one thing about people talk about the algorithm, right? So on social media platforms or search engines or something like that, a lot of your data is getting collected, whether you realize it or not. My data is getting collected whenever I use a search, whenever I go to, this is a front page of what I opened up on YouTube. And it's picking up on what I have been interested in the past. Okay, so this is going to share a little bit about me. I go to the PFF YouTube page not infrequently. So there's our president and CEO, Scott Sazik. Maybe it's going to pick up some mahjong, some Broadway interest, right? But you know what else it's showing here? And I didn't ask for this. This is where it found me. And that is this little advertisement in here in the corner, which I am definitely not endorsing, but says this catchy title, Big Pharma doesn't want you to know about this. And I thought that was just very interesting where, a lot of things I might be interested in. I don't know what the otter's doing there, but is embedded in that is just something that, somebody thinks might catch my eye and get me interested in going to buy something health related. So what is reliable online health information? I've shown you lots of examples, some of it which is I would consider reliable, and other sources maybe we want to interrogate a little further and try to understand, like, what are they really basing this on? So reliable online health information has a couple of characteristics, and these are properties that have been put forth by the Council of Medical Specialty Societies in terms of allowing organizations, nonprofit organizations, also other health-related companies to try to meet some standards for when they are putting health information out there online for people to consume, how they might meet some standards so that people can trust that information and know what they're getting is reliable. And these 4 principles are that the information is science-based, and we're definitely going to talk a lot more about that. Dr. Berger is going to expand on that for us. It's objective, it's transparent and accountable, and it's inclusive and equitable. So I'm going to go through these, but I'm going to pause after I just talk a little bit about the science-based quarter of that. And I also use the term evidence-based. So when we talk about being science-based, the information that's being put out there is consistent with the best available scientific evidence at the time, which understands that scientific information is always something that we're learning more about, that it's often unsettled, early, incomplete. And when we share information that may not be fully settled or incomplete or may change over time, we acknowledge that, and that updates are actually put out for that information when it does change. So a commitment to staying as current as possible with the scientific evidence that's being shared. You're also able, when you use that resource, to see the references for multiple credible sources, and that the information also undergoes some sort of review process prior to the sharing of the information. Now, a little bit more about what evidence-based medicine is. I took a course on this in medical school. It was, and we talked about it a lot in training. And evidence-based medicine is essentially using the scientific method to organize and apply what is currently available data to improve healthcare-related decisions. So that takes that best available science, combines it with the clinical experience of the person who's delivering the care, incorporates the experiences and values of the patient, and then uses that information to make the best medical decision for the patient. And this is something that I do in the clinic every day when we're talking about what should we do about something, health related. A patient with pulmonary fibrosis is trying to talk about, a new medication that we might start, or whether to get to go to pulmonary rehabilitation. Do they need oxygen? We talk about all these things and incorporate them to make the best decision for that patient. All right, so this is the pyramid that we reference, right? And these are the levels we consider of scientific evidence, from sort of the base all the way to the top, with the bottom there being sort of like the least backed in science. So expert opinion, because of somebody's experience, may not necessarily reflect what the ultimate scientific conclusion will be, but it's a starting point. And if we don't have other evidence, that may be what we end up going with in a recommendation or in practice. I mentioned case series and case reports. Well, that gives you some sense of what is happening in a human person or a series, a group of people, but it may be biased in some ways, and so it doesn't tell the whole story. And then again, you get a little bit more rigorous with each of these different levels of evidence. And I'm not going to steal Dr. Berger's thunder. I'm gonna turn it over to her to talk a little bit more about these things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Case, for teeing up a really great presentation today, and also to the webinar organizers for inviting me to speak. I think it's a really important topic to be discussing, which is the types of evidence that we generate using the scientific method, and to help inform the clinical decisions that we make when we're taking care of patients. So there's a broad spectrum of biomedical research that exists, and that spectrum spans from the level of the molecule all the way to the level of the human population. So starting with bench or laboratory-based research, this research is what we typically think of as more occurring in test tubes or in animal-based models. And it aims to understand biological mechanisms of disease and causes of disease, which can lead to identification of mechanisms of disease and targets for new drug development. Clinical research, by contrast, studies health and disease in people. And translational research is classically referred to as bench to bedside, or in other words, research that is focused on translating discoveries from the lab into treatments and diagnostic tools that can improve patient care. So I'm going to be focusing in on types of clinical research for our discussion here today. And there are two main types of clinical research, being interventional and observational. And interventional research, which is primarily randomized controlled clinical trials, are probably most commonly thought of when we're thinking about types of clinical research. And they're experimental in nature, which means that the researchers are instituting some sort of intervention, be it a new drug or other type of therapy, to test it for safety and efficacy. And that is compared to observational research studies, which can be largely descriptive in nature, things like case series or cross-sectional studies, or analytic in nature, which incorporate study types like cohort studies or case control studies. I have listed on the screen here examples of two different types of studies, one being observational and the other being interventional. So for example, the first study purports to look at the association between pulmonary fibrosis and pneumothorax, or air in the chest that's outside of the lung, being evaluated using a large hospital database. So in this example, we're not implementing any sort of intervention on the patients. We're just observing what is happening and describing our findings. This is an observational study. The second study here is looking at the fasting blood glucose levels being measured in patients with diabetes who are randomly assigned to receive a study drug or a placebo. And this is an example of an interventional study where we are implementing an intervention to determine the effect of that study drug. So as Dr. Case had mentioned, there's this classic pyramid of evidence where we have on the bottom what's considered to be our more lower quality evidence, including things like expert opinion or case series and case reports, compared to our more methodologically rigorous studies at the top of the pyramid, things like systematic reviews and randomized controlled clinical trials. I wanted to take a moment to make a quick note about the difference between a systematic review versus a narrative review, because very commonly when we refer to a review article that we're finding that has been published in a peer-reviewed journal article, what we're actually referring to is a narrative review. So a narrative review is a review article that's written by an expert or a group of experts that really reads more like a book report, where the authors have hand-selected the articles that they are including in that review article to give a broad overview of the topic, and oftentimes acts as a summary of the literature. That's in contrast to a systematic review, which is the type of review that, again, is at the top of our level of evidence pyramid. And that systematic review has been performed in a really structured way. So if you'll actually ever take the time to look at the methods section of a systematic review, you'll find that they give really exact instructions of how they've gone about identifying the articles that they're including in that review, including details such as the keywords that they used in their search and what databases they searched to identify those articles. And when they are combined with a meta-analysis, the goal here is to combine the findings of all of those studies to come out with an even more powerful outcome, in the sense that it's incorporating the findings of all of those studies put together. So a really powerful tool in research when done well. Next I want to turn back towards the bottom half of our evidence pyramid to talk a bit about case reports and case series. And this is something that Dr. Case has already spoken about what these are, but they're really meant to describe unusual or novel experiences of a single patient in the case of a report, or a group of patients in the case of a case series. And this is an example of a case report here on the screen that's describing the first case of a COVID-19 patient in the United States, written by a group of investigators out of Washington State. A great example of a case report that's telling us about something that's new and different and really meant to be hypothesis generating. But where we sometimes run into trouble is when we're trying to make conclusions about outcomes when we're looking at a case series. So it's a silly example that I made in PowerPoint where imagine that you take 10 patients who have an upper respiratory infection or a cold, and you have a group of researchers who give these 10 people a supplement, for example, that they believe is going to help those people with their cold-like symptoms. And in a few days, all of those people feel better. So the human brain, the way that it will work using heuristics or mental shortcuts is we'll think, well, wow, that's great. We took this supplement and then we felt better. But this fails to take into account what we all know is that usually when, in particular, a young healthy person gets a cold, they're all going to get better on their own in time, even without a supplement. And so what we're lacking in the case of a case series is this idea of a control group, where this might have been better to look at our supplement if we only have these 10 patients, to give 5 of them the supplement and to not give the other 5 the supplement. And what we would have found in this case is that all 10 of them, whether they got the supplement or not, would have ended up feeling better. So this idea of a control group in our research studies is really important, and definitely something that is incorporated into a randomized controlled clinical trial design. And it's actually in the name of the study type, right? The controlled part of the trial. And so a really important part of a study design that really adds to our level, our strength of our evidence that we're generating with these study types. So moving beyond case series and case reports into other types of observational data, things like case control studies or cohort studies that we had mentioned earlier. Anytime that we're doing an observational research, we are trying to generate findings about the world around us and give us information on how better we can take care of patients when it's medical research in particular. But anytime we're performing this research, there's always a chance for error. The two main groups of error includes random error and systematic error or bias. The best way to think about random error is error that occurs due to chance or statistical-based error. So if you imagine, for example, that you're going to flip a coin 10 times, and we all know that each time you flip a coin, there's a 50% chance that that coin is going to land on heads and a 50% chance that the coin will land on tails. And so in theory, when you're flipping the coin 10 times, it should land on heads 5 of those times and tails 5 of those times. But if you were actually to do this experiment yourself and flip the coin 10 times, what you may find is that that coin lands on heads 8 of the times and lands on tails 2 of the times. The way that we get around statistical error is to increase our sample size. So we're much more likely to land on heads half the time and tails half the time if we flip that coin 100 times or 1,000 times compared to just 10 times. Systematic error is error that might be introduced into our study due to a persistent distortion of our results in one direction or the other. Examples of systematic error are selection bias and information bias. Selection bias gets introduced into our study based on who we are including into the study. This is another example that I'm depicting in PowerPoint. Imagine that those 24 circles on the right side of the screen are representing patients. And the blue circles are representing patients who received a supplement but didn't have any benefit from it. And the 4 red circles are representing patients who received the supplement and felt like maybe it helped or made them feel better. And so 4 out of what I think are 24 circles on the screen there, 4 out of 24 of these individuals felt better when they took our example supplement, which is a response rate of maybe 16 or 17%. Right. But imagine that the researchers who are investigating this supplement and want to know whether or not it works want to evaluate the experiences of 4 people in this group. And they happen to, either through chance or intentionally, choose the 4 people who had a positive experience with it. And they include these 4 individuals in their case series. And based on this evidence, what they will say is that we've had 100% response rate from our supplement, which we know is very different from the response rate of the actual entire population. But it is looking different because of who we've included in this study, a form of selection bias. And selection bias can be generally unintentional and occurring in any study. But one of the ways that we can get around selection bias when we're doing a randomized clinical trial is through that important concept of randomization, where we're randomizing individuals generally to a treatment group or a control group. And so there's an equal chance that you will find yourself in either group. And this helps to eliminate any sort of bias in selecting who will be in one group or the other. So that randomization concept is really critical in a randomized controlled trial. Another form of bias that can be introduced when we're performing research is information bias, which is bias rather than being introduced based on who we're studying. It's how we're doing that study, how we're measuring or classifying information about our exposure or our outcome in the study. And one example of information bias is observer bias. Observer bias occurs when researchers may have a preconceived notion of what they expect to find in an examination. And so if you imagine, for example, that a group of researchers want to look at how a group of patients with a rash are going to respond to a new study cream, and they give some people the study cream and they give some people a placebo cream, and then they have the patients come back in a week after using it and look at the rash and need to determine whether or not that rash got better. If the researchers know who got what drug, they may unconsciously be expecting that the rash got better in the people who got the study drug. And so this will be bias on their part And the best way that we can get around this is through blinding. So a really common concept in a randomized controlled trial is that of double blinding, where both the patient and the investigator are unaware of whether or not they are receiving a new study treatment or placebo treatment. And it's the best way that we have of minimizing this type of bias in that way. Another important concept that I wanted to discuss today and bring up is this idea of correlation versus causation. And that in turn introduces this idea of confounders. And confounders are factors that influence both the cause and the effect in a research study. So one example that I recently was shared with me by a friend is imagine that there are a group of researchers who are measuring ice cream sales versus shark attacks over time. So the researchers found that as the number of ice cream sales went up over the summer, so did the number of shark attacks. It would obviously be inaccurate for us to conclude that ice cream sales cause shark attacks, right? And more likely what's going on in this scenario is that there's a confounder here, which is the temperature. And so we know that the temperature, when it's warmer out, people are more likely to buy ice cream. And when it's warmer out, people are more likely to be in the water where shark attacks happen. And so even though these two things are correlated, one did not necessarily cause the other. And so we have a confounder in this case. Again, returning back to this idea of a randomized controlled clinical trial, this randomization part of the randomized controlled trial is the best way that we can account for confounders, because there's an equal chance through randomization that these confounders will exist in either group. I hope that through talking through some of the limitations that exist in certain types of studies, I've mentioned along the way how the methodologic design of a randomized controlled trial really works to mitigate some of those opportunities for error in our studies. And they really are considered the most rigorous clinical study design for assessing a diagnostic test or a new therapy. They minimize confounding and selection bias, as we've talked about. We've also mentioned this concept of double blinding to help mitigate observer bias. And RCTs also have very standardized testing and interventions that allow for others to reproduce the results, because reproducibility is really important in science in order to be more confident in the results of any one study. So whenever we are looking at the results of a study, it's really important to be critical appraisers. I believe that this is something Dr. Case is also going to be touching on here shortly, but we always want to make sure that when we're reading about a claim that we see on the internet or online, does that source actually use data? If so, what type of data is it? Is there a randomized controlled clinical trial behind that data, for example? Was the study sample representative of the target population? Was random sampling used, or should we be concerned about the possibility of selection bias? How large was the study sample? Are we talking about the experiences of 10 people, or are we talking about the experiences of 1,000 people? Are those studies reproducible? Is this one small study that's making a claim compared to 100 studies that are saying the opposite? Or are there a lot of studies that have consistently had the same result? Is it biologically plausible? Do the results make sense? Always an important question to ask ourselves. So I'm going to stop sharing now and allow Dr. Case to talk a little bit more about that topic.
All right. Thank you so much. That's such a great in-depth covering of that pyramid. I'm actually going to go back to it for just a minute, because I want to go back to another issue here, and that is these are all levels of evidence in science and medical science, right? These are all different levels, and the pyramid sort of emphasizes the strength of those levels of evidence. But sometimes it is important to act early or with a lesser level of evidence because of the nature of the disease under study or the environment that it's happening in, and there may not be enough evidence generated yet, but action does need to be taken. And so that happens sometimes in critical care. It happens in rare disease because we just don't, when there are truly very few, ultra rare disease, for example, few patients, there may not be enough patients out there for more than a case controlled study. So there are reasons for doing these things, including building evidence to study and then do more rigorous science. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that point that Dr. Berger made so nicely there. So I'm going to turn back to the issue of online health information, because now we've talked about 1/4 of that, which is being science-based. And now we'll talk about the other aspects of that. So objectivity refers to a source of information not being influenced by anything but the science and health related information itself, not being influenced by finances, politics, personal preference or what have you. And anything that is sponsored or an advertisement in that health related information really should be clearly disclosed. And so the example that I showed you earlier from social media with the orange juice shot, obviously that was an advertisement. It was labeled as sponsored and probably had some financial incentive for that person to be sharing that information. So could be a little less than completely objective. Transparency is another element of that. So if there are conflicts of interest, meaning, and they don't have to be financial, they can be, they can be other types of conflicts of interest, a interpersonal relationship or something like that needs to be disclosed. Those things are made apparent in sharing the information. And then also is part of transparency and accountability. If information is then found to be mistaken or incorrect or something changes, a correction should be publicly posted or retraction. And we do see in some cases that scientific papers, when something inadvertent or even unfortunately intentional is published that should not have been, a journal will retract that and make that known. And then again, just going back to updating, because science changes over time and the environment changes and the knowledge changes as we get more evidence, scheduling updates for information regarding health to make sure that that information is current. And then again, accountability, the ability to receive feedback from the people who are consuming that information. And then finally, something that's important if we're putting out health-related information, then to a public audience, then it really should be in a manner that uses language that is understandable and accessible for the people who are intended to use it. So that's part of being inclusive and equitable. It prioritizes access. So if I'm saying that I'm going to provide health-related information to the public for good purposes, I probably shouldn't put it behind, a paywall that subscribes me to a product that I have to buy to be able to access that information. And it also provides the correct context and relevance for any information, health-related research that's being shared, and maybe doesn't just put it out there for people to try to figure out on their own, but talks about how it's relevant, what the limitations are, and who it really applies to. And I tried to, just so you know, use good sources, good practices here, and giving you the sources that I used for this information as well. And you'll notice that Dr. Berger did the same. So this is from the National Library of Medicine. This is from Medline Plus. It's a .gov website. And I love this checklist. There are other checklists out there, and I will give you some resources to go to. This is a nice checklist for just evaluating that information that's out there now that we have kind of a sense of the levels of evidence from a scientific perspective, and can then can make decisions on there when we're seeing this information that may or may not be something that we were looking for. So when we're looking at a website or social media, who's in charge of that? Can you find that information? Why are they doing it? What's their mission to be out there? And is there contact information? There should be an about us or about this organization section, and a way to contact someone that doesn't involve buying something in this case. And then funding. So this is part of transparency. Where does the money to support that information sharing come from? Are there advertisements? Are the advertisements labeled and separated from the sharing of health-related information as well? The quality, and this really gets to what Dr. Berger talked about. Where does the information come from? Can you link to it? Can you go and look at that information yourself? And actually look at the science there and see, what sort of study was that? How do they choose their content? Is there a review process by people who know or should know about the topic before it gets shared? Are there claims or stories that seem unbelievable or intended to tug at your emotions to promote something on the site? And is it current? Can you find a date? Does it seem like it's been updated regularly? Is there many times you'll see last reviewed and something like that there. And then again, for privacy purposes, because not all actors out there are well intentioned. Is the site, app, what have you, looking for your personal information? If so, do they disclose how they're planning to use that information? And are you okay with that information being used in that way? Oops. So if you want to download these slides, these are just a couple of different sources. These are sources that I used in preparing these slides for you. And I think they're great to walk through in just further understanding how to critically evaluate the source of information that are out there. There's even a tutorial from the National Institute of Aging that kind of walks through some examples, like a made-up website, and what you might want to look for when you're looking at that information. So I think we have time for a good amount of time for questions. So I would love to invite Jamie and Dr. Berger to come back and chat for a little bit.
Thank you both. That was wonderful and such great information. And I'm hoping that our audience can really use that to apply when they're looking at things out there to figure out what is good information. We do have a couple questions. So one of the questions that was asked was, sometimes people are concerned that there isn't enough research to support something new in medicine. So how do we know when enough has been looked at?
That's a great question. I'll take a stab at it first, Dr. Berger, if you want, and then I'll let you fill in the gaps of what I've not said. I was trying to refer to this, but I think part of being a scientist and doing research is asking questions and knowing where the gaps are, and understanding the process. Right? So, and the levels of evidence and what is attainable at the time, and with what level of urgency and importance do we need to act on that information? I'll give an example. If you've got a common disease that has multiple treatment options, let's just go with high blood pressure for grins. And there are multiple treatment options, and the majority of people can have their blood pressure managed well and easily by the existing treatments that are out there, then there may not be a need to act on a lower level of evidence to generate a new treatment for this disease, right? Because there are options out there, they work well, and the iterative change that might occur from something new may not make a whole lot of impact, right? It may be more convenient, it may be, better tolerated, may work a little bit better. Instead of taking 2 medicines, people can take 1. But we don't necessarily have to accept a lower level of evidence for that situation because there's not a lot of urgency to it. And we can take our time and go through all the steps and make sure that the proposed new thing is of benefit to people, is not harmful, and applies to the population that needs it. On the other hand, let's go back to 15 years ago, 16 almost, when there were no FDA-approved therapies for pulmonary fibrosis. And, there were things that were being done, treating people with, that we later found out weren't such a good idea because we accepted a lower level of evidence, right? This is going back to, we've talked about this on prior webinars, back to the trials of prednisone, azathioprine, and N-acetylcysteine. And that there were studies done, they were randomized, they were not placebo-controlled. So a lower level of evidence was used to justify the treatment of lots of patients with this combination of drugs. But there wasn't anything else out there that we knew worked. And so the medical and scientific community were willing to accept, in many cases, a lower level of evidence because of the lack of therapy and the importance of disease. Later, however, right, the community figured out, the scientific community figured out that it actually is possible to do randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials in pulmonary fibrosis. And we've done many since then, including going back and revisiting that idea of prednisone, azathioprine, and N-acetylcysteine for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, that specific instance. And it turns out it was worse than placebo when it was studied that way, right? And so that changed the science, right? Because we knew better, you know better, you do better. And now we're not willing to accept a lower level of evidence because we know we can do better. And so the drugs that are available for pulmonary fibrosis, progressive pulmonary fibrosis, for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis now have randomized placebo-controlled phase 3 clinical trials behind them, as well as post-marketing information that gives us confidence that in the patient population that it's right for, it's right for. I'm going to pause there. I've given a couple of examples, and I don't want to monopolize this. I do want to, you guys hear from me a lot. Dr. Berger.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your example with using like steroid treatment, for example, in idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, because I think that that's a really spot on example of us doing the best that we can with the information that we have available at the time to take care of patients. And our knowledge in any disease process is always ever changing. And it doesn't, I think that's actually a green flag that we're always willing to continue to update our knowledge and change clinical practice based on the best available information that we have. And so rather than seeing that as a pitfall, I think we should really see that as a really good thing that science is continuing to trying to create new evidence over time.
Thank you both. We have some other great questions rolling in. So I'm going to pose this one to the both of you. Do you have any comments about the implications, either pro or con or both, of the increased use of AI in research?
I'm happy to try and start. I think that AI can be a really awesome tool because especially with our pulmonary fibrosis patients, we are really always trying to advance care and come up with better treatment options and more data and more information. And so AI can be so great because it's so efficient. It's way more efficient than some human-based processes, right? But that being said, it's a really evolving process right now in terms of being aware of what potential pitfalls are with using AI in research. I think a lot of people refer to AI as having a big black box where there's not always a lot of transparency. So thinking about systematic reviews in particular, I think we really want to be really transparent with what studies we're including or not including in our systematic review and meta-analysis. And so if the AI isn't really straightforward, it may erroneously leave out certain studies that should have been included or include studies that maybe with human verification, they would have said, hey, that one actually isn't relevant to the target population we're trying to look at or the question we're trying to answer. And so I think it can potentially be a great tool because again, we really want really good science to be happening quickly to come up with answers for our patients as efficiently as possible. But a lot of caveats with that. And I think, again, a really evolving process that we need to learn more about.
Yeah, I would just say the short answer for me is like trust but verify, right? I think that easing the process is important, but if you're writing that systematic review, that's your name, not the AI on that, and you have to be accountable and transparent for that, right? When somebody's using an AI tool, we want to know that has happened, and then also verify the information that is being included, just like Dr. Berger was saying.
Great, thank you. When our viewers are taking a look at research, what kind of background should they make sure someone has if they're conducting clinical trials that are relevant to pulmonary fibrosis?
Do you want to take this one or you want me to start off?
Or yeah, I'm happy to. So whenever we're talking about pulmonary fibrosis clinical trials, obviously we want someone to have expertise in taking care of patients with interstitial lung disease, but it's really important for someone who's designing a clinical trial to have knowledge and expertise in clinical trial study design. You know, we have such limited opportunities in terms of funding and resource to do clinical trials in patients. It takes a lot of time. We're following people, you know, over the course of the year, ballpark for some of these studies. And so we want to be really making sure that we're doing the best studies possible with the resources that we have. And so you want the best people at the top to be designing the studies, not only to having a knowledge base in interstitial lung disease, but in clinical trial research methodology to be at the forefront of that.
I think from a site level, you know, somebody who's participating in a clinical trial, you know, somebody who's running that trial is going to be usually a physician. Most often in interstitial lung disease trials, those are pulmonologists, but you might see a rheumatologist there as well. There are also some clinical trial professionals that are physicians, and maybe they're trained in other areas of specialty, internal medicine, or something like that, that are actually doing pulmonology studies. But the activities within the study that are being delegated to clinical trial coordinators or respiratory therapists to do data collection in terms of PFTs or patient-reported outcomes and medical information and things like that. Those people actually have to have certain qualifications to be participating in the study, and they have to go through training on the study and demonstrate and log that. So there are regulations around who can participate in these clinical trials as well in terms of interacting with patients, gathering data, processing labs. I can't just pull a nurse from my clinic who's never had any training in clinical trials to do the clinical trial work. And I can't just ask one of my colleagues who's never done any clinical trial work to fill in for me that day. It's actually got to be somebody who knows the study, who knows the disease space, can follow a protocol, and has training in those areas and has training on the study as well ahead of that time. So most clinical trials actually have, or all of them do, a log of what's been delegated and who the participants are in terms of running this trial at this site, and then go up a level. That same oversight and delegation happens at the oversight level of the study, as well as Dr. Berger was referring to.
Great, thank you both. We're coming up on time, so I'm going to start wrapping us up here, but I wanted to thank both of you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today. We know you're both very busy, so thank you so much for all the work that you've put into today's presentation. We just have a couple ending announcements, and Pulmonary Fibrosis Awareness Month is just a couple days away. Believe it or not, September is right around the corner. I don't know how we got here, but here we are. This year's theme is Every Breath of the Way, and keep your eye on our social media channels throughout the month for stories, highlights, facts about pulmonary fibrosis and interstitial lung disease. And additionally, keep an eye on the landmarks in your neighborhood. A lot of them are going to light up blue for our Blue Up for PF campaign. And don't forget to shine blue lights in your homes this year to bring awareness to pulmonary fibrosis throughout the month of September. And then during Pulmonary Fibrosis Awareness Month, we have ILD Day. ILD Day is on September 10th, and we have a very special webinar that day. We're coming together with many other patient organizations for a really exciting webinar, Genetics and Beyond, exploring interstitial lung disease in families and individuals. So please check out our website. Make sure you sign up for that webinar. We would love to see you there. And then last but not least, big thank you to our sponsors that help us continue to run this PFF disease education webinar series. So without our great speakers and our sponsors, this would not be possible. So we just want to thank our sponsors as well as our speakers. And we will see you all on September 10th for ILD Day. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.